Russian oil tankers, dubbed the Dark Fleet, are making waves in the global oil trade. This enigmatic fleet of ships is allowing Russia to export its oil without hindrance by employing covert methods to get over Western sanctions and pricing constraints. But at what price? Due to their challenging trading climate, these clandestine vessels, owned and controlled by Russian companies, have infuriated and alarmed Western countries. Russia's expanding fleet to maintain Russian fuel and petroleum exports, a $2.2 billion fleet of aging tankers has been created. Consequently, certain freight costs have increased. These tankers, which are frequently older, started to appear when a large number of ships started selling for outrageous prices to unidentified buyers last year. The conventional fleet has been reduced in size by this gray fleet, making trade conditions more challenging. The restrictions imposed on Russian refined fuels earlier this month have resulted in a fivefold rise in daily revenues for vessels transporting oil goods across the Atlantic. Executives are wondering whether they will ever be able to serve everyone else again in light of the recent spike in freight charges. What is the Dark Fleet's specific mode of operation and how has it managed to avoid discovery for such a long time? The secret is a convoluted system of vessels and tactics that have allowed Russia to export oil to nations under punitive sanctions. In order to get over Western sanctions, this covert network of tankers was established last year. It has made it possible for Russia to keep selling its oil for considerably more than the $60 price ceiling that these sanctions set. Approximately half of Russia's oil sales are currently thought to go through this fleet. Why then is this such a major concern? It turns out that, unless petroleum is sold for less than a specific price level, Russian oil providers are prohibited by Western sanctions from using transportation and insurance services. However, Russia is able to circumvent this quota and sell their petroleum for far more than the allowed amount because to their dark fleet. The covert tanker fleet of Russia regulation evading shadow infrastructures are frequently established as a result of sanctions. Regarding Russia's oil trade, the Kremlin is presently assisted by more than 400 shadow or ghost tankers in rerouting its oil supplies to nations like China and India who are not party to the G7 price cap regime. The so-called flags of convenience that Russia's shadow tankers typically fly over include Cameroon, Palau, and Panama. Private registries that fly these flags occasionally lack the authority or political inclination to impose maritime laws on their ships. This makes it possible for tankers who violate sanctions to register their boats through anonymous offshore shell companies and to obtain bogus identity numbers. Over 100 ships are said to be sailing under phony flags at the moment, which enables them to operate beyond international laws. Tankers also frequently disable or tamper with vessel tracking systems in order to hide their operations from maritime authorities and insurance companies. According to Vessel's Value, addition to the $1.4 billion invested in ships that carry crude oil, over $850 million was spent last year growing the dark fleet of fuel tankers. Since the invasion of Ukraine, more than 100 petroleum tankers have been supplied to nations outside of the G7 or the EU. Ships now have to travel greater distances since nearly all maritime petroleum imports from Russia are prohibited by the European Union. This has increased demand for vessels and raised the cost of freight while decreasing the fleet's efficiency. The influence of Russia but money isn't the only factor. Russia's employment of the Dark Fleet is also an attempt to increase its dominance and reach. Russia may establish connections and sway policy decisions by giving nations much-needed resources. This contributes to expanding its own sphere of influence and challenging the current global order, while suffering a severe decline in income and Western sanctions. The International Energy Agency reports that Russia's oil export volumes have returned to levels last observed before to its invasion of Ukraine. A smaller pool of customers can also negotiate larger reductions, although the price of Russian oil and oil products is capped by the Group of 7 nations. Consequently, the exchange of Russian oil has grown increasingly intricate, and numerous Western exporters have retreated. This has made room for new, less transparent players, which has helped to shape the gray fleet. Several reports state that China increased its purchases of Russian oil by 38% in the first quarter of this year over the same period last year. India is becoming more and more dependent on Russian oil as seen by the nearly tenfold increase in imports. Roughly 1/3 of tanker deals this year have involved the selling of oil tankers to newly established companies or unnamed buyers, according to UK-based market intelligence consultancy Vessel's Value. In 2023 and 2022, sales to unidentified customers made up only 10% and 4% of the total, respectively. By employing shadow tankers and other dubious methods, Russia is able to export its oil in spite of Western sanctions and pricing restrictions. Industry statistics state that around 3.4 million barrels of crude oil are transported into Russian ports every day and delivered to China, India, and Turkey. Moscow announced in March that it will limit exports by 700,000 barrels per day, but the data from international agencies does not show this decrease. A few months ago, delivery stops to Poland and Germany even expanded maritime trade. A significant number of shadow tankers list unknown Asia as their intended destination, primarily China and India. The United Arab Emirates, Oman, or Malaysia are mentioned as the senders. Since the year's commencement, over 60 ship transshipments have been registered in the Mediterranean, ostensibly concealing their origin. Russia is using India as a center for its oil. There is a gap in the Western sanctions against Russian oil, as shown by a recent analysis from the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA. Europe is no longer allowed to import it. Instead, other suppliers include China, India, Singapore, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey. The study claims that these nations have been dubbed laundromats for Russian oil. $42 billion has been spent by Western countries on Russian crude that has been laundered into a variety of oil products from allies. With diesel exports increasing to over 1.6 million barrels per day in February 2024 compared to the prior year, India is leading the charge. Diesel is now one of the main products of trade between India and the EU due to the increase in exports. Will the oil industry of the Kremlin employ opaque strategies to outwit Western nations as long as Russia finds ways to skirt sanctions? According to the research, this practice of importing oil that has been cleaned up from Russia's friendly neighbors is a significant loophole that lessens the effect of Western sanctions on Russia. The study goes on to accuse India of providing a backdoor for Russian oil shipments into Britain, undermining the nation's attempts to limit money to the Kremlin. By switching from direct imports from Russia to imports from refineries supplied by Russia, some British consumers have unintentionally helped to strengthen the Russian oil sector. The G7 nations are getting ready to attack Russia's shadow fleet. The Financial Times claims that these techniques are used to export every third barrel, or more than 1 million barrels a day, from Russian seaports. This entails not transmitting data about their target ports or shutting off the transponders while at sea. In addition to the inability of oil service providers to appropriately classify delivery, freight, customs, and insurance charges, the G7 countries want to implement new procedures. Nevertheless, in spite of these initiatives, Russia has boosted its oil exports. From February 24 to 28, tankers left seaports with 4.1 million barrels of oil per day. With the help of the Shadow Fleet, which is made up of several tankers slated for scrap, Russia has been able to produce a record-breaking 3.5 million barrels of oil per day over the last 4 weeks. This calls into question the efficacy of the sanctions in place as well as the necessity of more robust measures to stop Russia's dark fleet from engaging in opaque activities. Since it gives Russia a way to get around the sanctions and increase its influence globally, the dark fleet is a major source of annoyance for the US government. The Black Fleet can avoid detection by employing strategies like disabling their transponders or moving through locations with scant surveillance. Because of this, it is now far more difficult for authorities to monitor their actions. What effect, in your opinion, is Russia's dark fleet having on international trade, maritime security, and oil markets? Let me know down below. If you want to continue to learn about business investing and financial education, we have got this video waiting on the screen for you to check out. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.